Oh, that's just a recording thing. Okay, we are recording.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Shoko, and this is Jamie.
Hi.
We both teach at Rikkyo University, and last semester we taught the same English discussion course online, but we took different approaches. And after the semester ended, we talked for about 2 hours to reflect on our approaches and compared and contrasted our experience. So today we would like to share our reflection on those two approaches.
Okay.
In this session, we are going to first give some background information about our context, and then Jamie will explain how she conducted her class, and I will describe my lessons. Then we will share our reflection and connection to our development as a teacher. If you have any questions, please send us email. We will show the email address at the end of this presentation. As I said before, we currently teach English discussion course, but we also developed that English discussion course at Rikkyo University in the Foreign Language Education and Research Center. This English course is a mandatory course for all the first year students, and each class has about 10 students. There are 4 levels. The TOEIC scores are written here, but Jamie taught level 2 and level 3 in the spring semester, and I taught 2 level 3 classes. We both used the same in-house textbook to teach this course.
Okay, and as we were planning the course, of course, the intention was to create this for a 100-minute face-to-face format. As you can see here on the screen, this is the overview and methodology that we would be following had we done face-to-face classes this past semester. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were forced to move online, as many universities everywhere were, and instructors within our department found a preference for Zoom due to the breakout room feature that we could still use for group work and practice. However, our specific department did not have a licensed contract with Zoom until right before the semester started, so there was this need to create a possible 40-minute limit on lessons with smaller class groups in the event that we didn't get the license contract in time. However, we did, and some instructors chose to stay with 5 students for 40 minutes times 2, or all students together for 80 minutes. I chose the 40-minute type, and Shoko chose the 80-minute type. And now we'll be discussing how we planned and rearranged our lessons based on these preferences. And for me, like I said, I chose the 40-minute lessons, and the way it was set up within the 100-minute class block is that there would be 2 groups of 5 students with a 10-minute break or overflow buffer in the middle. And the remaining unused class time, the offline class time, would be used for work. Shoko did the 80-minute lessons with all 10 students together in one Zoom class, and then the remaining 20 minutes of offline work would be for other assignments. In my format, what I'll talk about now is why I chose this format and stayed with this format, planning notes for each lesson, and also the lesson format, the structure within each lesson, and assignments and expectations outside of the lesson. My main concern when I chose this format was regarding student capabilities in an online format. Just as this was new for instructors, this was also new for students. I wanted to find a way to relieve students of any possible e-learning fatigue since they were taking all of their classes online, and these were also first-year university students. I also wanted to find a way to condense the discussion lesson into an efficient and active format. So taking the 100 minutes of activities and consolidating it into a shorter amount of time. And in doing so, creating another solid and reliable routine for students week to week, which I'll show in just a moment. And in doing so, and by having a shorter format each week, this could also minimize student anxiety in an online classroom environment. They would still have to practice speaking English and having discussions, but they wouldn't have to be in the classroom for as long as they normally would. The way I did the planning was, of the 10 students in each class, I would randomly sort them into 2 5-student groups per week and send Zoom invites to their respective groups for their respective class times. So there were no issues with students entering the wrong class. The only time that I kept groups the same is when there were discussion test lessons, so that students would have the time between the 2 classes to study and rehearse their discussion and ideas together. So another way to relieve anxiety, especially for those higher stakes test lessons. This is the format that I usually followed. These times could be flexible depending on how a particular target discussion skill was being taught, or if students were having trouble using it naturally in a discussion. Sometimes, depending on the discussion skill, if it was one about building ideas, such as giving reasons and examples, students would have chances to do those in the breakout rooms. If it was more of an organizational skill, such as joining a discussion or connecting ideas, they might spend more time together as just the 5 students. And I would go through this format at the beginning of each lesson so students would know what was happening in class during that time. And I rarely, if ever, strayed from this sequence. The next couple of slides are going to show you examples of the target language intro, further explanation, breakout practice, and an example of a discussion that they would do. So at the beginning, so within each chapter of our in-house textbook, we have a page explaining the target language skill as well as a sample dialogue. And I relied on the dialogue more in the online format than I would do in face-to-face lessons, because the students could all see this together. We could all look at this together on the screen or in our books, and students had a chance to practice this and see how the skill was being used. And we could also use this to start practicing and generating our own mini discussion based on the topic in the sample dialogue. So we would spend a lot of time practicing this and then manipulating it to add in our own ideas. After that, we would move on to a practice where they might either be in a breakout room in groups of 2 or 3, or like I said, if it was more of an organizational skill, they might practice it all together. But I would mute my mic, possibly turn off my screen so they could still just practice. And we would usually try to allow time to work on this with room for feedback. After that, the bulk of the class time would be spent working on their one in-class discussion. So one thing that was dropped was one of the class discussions, and going from 100 minutes face-to-face to 40 minutes online. So I would use the second discussion within each unit every week, and students would be informed of this the week prior. So students would also have a chance to practice this skill and the topic before each discussion. So we would spend a minute just reviewing the preparation, going over any unusual vocabulary that they weren't sure about, and then for at least 14 minutes, anywhere from 11 to 14 minutes, they would work on this discussion. And again, my mic and camera would be turned off so they could just focus on each other. Offline, they had more time offline than they did in the class. So they would have time to work on follow-up questions and feedback. There would be questions focusing on the content, skill, reflection, and goals. So it was always the same sequence each week. There would also be a reading comprehension quiz. I would allow them 10 minutes, which is double the amount of time they would normally have in class with respect to internet connectivity issues, but they would have 1 attempt. Other expectations that I appraised them of each week was, looking ahead at the next lesson, making sure that they are, looking ahead at the next skill. And I saw this emerge more as they were expressing in their goals that they wanted to practice and be good at the next skill that was coming up in the textbook. So I found that they were following these expectations. And now Shoko will walk us through the 80-minute format that she worked with each week.
Even though I taught 9 out of 12 lessons with this 80-minute format, the other 3 lessons, which were test lessons, I used a similar format as Jamie's. First, let me explain why I chose this format. First, the biggest reason was to replicate the students' learning opportunities and learner outcome, even in online situations. Because one of the most important goals in this course is to build students' speaking fluency, I wanted to provide a lot of speaking practice opportunities. The second point is related to the first point, but by avoiding me into giving instruction, same instruction for both groups, I thought I could save some time for them to practice speaking. The third point is that I wanted to help students build a rapport. In this COVID-19 situation, students cannot meet up with their classmates. So if students spend longer time in this small class, they might be able to feel more comfortable talking to each other in the class. And also it might help them transition from this online to face-to-face class in the future. The last point is about my rationale for employing the 2 40-minute sessions for the test lessons. I wanted to assess one group at a time and increase my accuracy on assessing the students. So I chose this format for the test lessons. This is a timetable for my class. The orange part shows the time that was reduced in online lessons, and the purple ones show the time that was increased or added in the online format compared to the face-to-face version. I'm gonna just please take some time to read this timetable, and then I'm gonna share some changes that I made from the face-to-face to online lessons. So before they joined the online lesson, as Jamie's lesson, I also made the quiz available on Blackboard 24 hours before the lesson so that students could avoid technical issues and to being able to take the quiz anytime within this 24 hours. Also, I wanted to reduce their e-learning fatigue. As for number 3, target discussion skill presentation, I spent about the same time in my online lesson as the face-to-face lesson, but I took different approaches from the offline lessons. As Jamie said, I made more use of model dialogues, which means I made the presentation stage slightly more teacher-fronted. I would have students discuss first, and then I gauge students' use of discussion skills, and then introduce the new skill to show the gap between what they can do and how they can improve. But usually I would bring some students' example utterances from the previous sessions and show it, and then have them compare their dialogue with the model dialogue. As for number 4, as shown in purple, I made this pair practice part longer because I wanted students to feel that they get individual feedback even though they are taking the class with 9 other students. And it took time for me to move around the breakout rooms, so I spent more time in this pair practice section. As for number 5 and number 6, these are assessed discussions. First, students prepared their ideas individually. In the face-to-face class, I would have them prepare the ideas individually and then have them collaborate to share their ideas and practice expressing their ideas. but I omitted that collaboration stage due to the time constraint. And when they actually did the discussion in 2 groups, I used 2 devices, one laptop for one group and a tablet for one group. And I used 2 earphones to listen to both groups concurrently. And please just look at number 8, which is 10 minutes for open room for questions and conversation. So I kept the Zoom room open for about 10 minutes at the end of the class so that students can ask me any questions, or if they wanted to casually chat either in English or Japanese to build a rapport, they could use that time to respond well. Can you go to the next slide? So as I said before, in the other 3 lessons, I used the similar format as Jamie's, and there were 3 types of self-study tasks that I employed. One is discussion skill practice. I noticed that in an online lesson, students seemed to have more difficulty asking questions. They probably felt a little bit uncomfortable interrupting each other in this online situation. So I prepared some tasks to have them practice asking questions. Okay. Another type of task is idea generation tasks. So before the test, students could just complete this idea generation task so that they could use their ideas in the discussion test. As for the first group, I allowed them to complete the tasks anytime before the class. And then after they take the test, they could just have some relaxing time. Okay, please go to the next slide. And the other type of the self-study task was reflection task. So after the test, students answered some questions regarding what they did well in the discussion test and what they want to improve in the next discussions.
So looking back on how this semester went with the 40-minute format that I chose, for me, because things were happening so quickly in such a reduced amount of time, it increased my reflection and action. It meant that as things were happening, for example, in the first 40-minute group of a class, if things were taking longer, or if I noticed the students were struggling with a particular skill or phrase, it meant for the other half of the class, I was reflecting on the spot, taking notes on the spot on how possible missteps could be minimized in the second group. And making sure that however much time I was allotting for discussion in the first group, I was making sure to absolutely replicate it in the second group as best as I could. I found that student empathy and student support of one another increased, not just in helping each other with using English in a discussion, but also in light of online issues. If one student was having frequent internet connectivity issues, their group members were very supportive and understanding of each other. I found that despite removing many parts of the original class structure, the in-class quiz, the fluency, and one of the discussions, we were still able to meet the course goals in a reduced amount of time. More than half of the class time was student speaking time. Students still had ample time to practice with each other and also be able to discuss at least one discussion deeply using the target discussion skills. And through this, I was able to build rapport with the students in a much quicker amount of time. And students within the class were able to build rapport with each other. However, because of the reduced amount of time, that left little time for peer reflection and peer feedback during the class. Most, if not all, of the feedback was teacher-fronted, which meant that in the offline follow-up questions and feedback, that was really the only place where students could do their own reflection and feedback on how things went. So I'd like to be able to incorporate that more into the online lesson. Another thing that was lost in this reduced amount of time was integrating target skill presentation approaches such as test, teach, test, or dialogue comparison. I tended to follow a very strict structure from week to week, which relied heavily on the dialogue that was in the book. I did not stray and add anything that was of my own creation, which I would normally do in a face-to-face class. And I'd like to be able to try to do that a little bit more if we end up teaching this course again in spring 2021 online. Shoko?
Yes.
Oh.
Okay. So with the 80-minute format, I think reacting to students' needs was the biggest advantage because we had some space and time for flexibility. If students struggle to use discussion skills, I was able to spend more time for them to practice. And because they had different stages to demonstrate their skills, at each stage, I was able to provide some scaffolding that was important at that stage and build their skills gradually. Another thing is monitoring students was one of the biggest concerns for me when I chose this 80-minute format because I needed to monitor 2 groups at the same time, but it actually worked well. In the face-to-face class, we can't really shut some students' voice, but when I checked or when I saw some students demonstrate their use of skills, I could just switch my earphones to the other one to focus on the students who haven't demonstrated their skill use. However, as Jamie said, giving feedback to individual students or reflective session for them to think about what they did well and what they couldn't do well was a bit difficult. Also, Jamie said that in our session that students seemed to feel more comfortable speaking up in front of the whole group because there were only 5 students. But in my case, when I asked questions in front of everyone, only certain students answered questions. So it may be good to have some feedback sessions first in a smaller group right after they finish the discussion and then come back to the whole group. Another thing is the better use of self-study time. I needed to cut some activities, pair activities such as idea generation, collaborative idea generation, or analyzing target skill use. But instead of spending time in class to individually develop ideas, probably I could have given some self-study activities where they can just generate ideas alone, and then in class, they can actually share their ideas.
So, in connecting this to my own personal overall teacher journey, in any environment that I teach in, I always want to put the student needs first and make sure that their language needs are being supported. So for me, building rapport with the students is very important to get it established as early as possible, regardless of medium. And also helping students understand the goals of the lesson quickly. For me personally, it kind of gives me the confidence that I know what I'm doing as I lead the class, but it also helps students build trust in me that they know that I can guide them through a lesson effectively. Regardless of an environment, I also want students to know that I'm a source of support in navigating a new learning environment, whether it's learning in a completely different country or in this case, learning in a completely different medium. I also always want to work on improving my lesson delivery effectiveness and increasing my reflection and action regardless of the class that I'm teaching in, especially if I'm teaching the same class over and over. So teaching 3 discussion classes a week, it gives me a lot of time to reflect and modify as I go. And I'm certainly able to do that with the discussion course. So doing the class online, doing all my classes online this semester gave me a chance to work on continuing my teacher journey as someone who can deliver things effectively and also build support and rapport with students.
For me, I think by being forced to teach in a different situation, which is online, I think I I'm becoming more open to different approaches. If I hadn't have to teach this class online, I may not have explored different ways to present the target language skills, or I may not have tried discussion forum online with among students. So it has been a great opportunity for me to develop or become open to different styles of teaching. Another thing is that I'm now thinking about how I can keep new approaches and apply that to the face-to-face class. For example, by introducing the discussion forum, I could see how we can focus more on accuracy. So even though I never used discussion forum in my face-to-face class, I hope to use that in my class. Also, I thought by having that 10-minute session for just casual talk every time, it helped them to build a rapport even in an online situation. So I thought just having one icebreaker or rapport building activity in a face-to-face class, lesson 1, may not be enough. So it kind of made me aware of the importance of having that kind of activity time to time, and not assume that students will just build a rapport by working on group tasks or just class-related tasks. The final thing is about developing curriculum. We didn't really coordinate that I teach the 80-minute lesson and Jamie teaches the 40-minute lesson, but by actually talking through how we taught the course, I think if we need to teach this course online again, I think we have a better idea of what we can share with the teachers too, teachers who didn't teach the other way, about what could be incorporated in their lessons. Okay.
Okay. So this brings us to the end of our presentation. We want to thank all of you for watching. And if you have any questions, this is our contact information. You can reach us anytime. Of course, new semesters are starting across Japan and are already underway around the world. So of course, we're all busy either continuing online or in some other modified format. So I wish you the best of luck in your ongoing semesters. But again, if you have any questions about this or would like to consider incorporating any of this into your own lessons, please feel free to contact us anytime here. Thank you for watching.